know I don't speak about it much on this channel, but I absolutely love professional wrestling. It's something I feel very passionate about, and so I figure I might as well talk about it from time to time. And since we've just had one of my favourite pay-per-views of the year, the Royal Rumble, well, I guess it just put me in a wrestling mood. I know my channel is all about analysing storytelling, and sometimes I feel people forget that pro wrestling, despite technically being a sport, is still very much all about storytelling. Now, I've spoken a lot about villainous redemption arcs in the past, and while that may be a popular storytelling trope in general, I don't think it happens anywhere quite as much as it does in professional wrestling. As you may know, wrestlers can generally be divided into heels and faces. Faces being good guys, heels being bad guys, with the occasional tweener who kinda sits somewhere in the middle. And it is somewhat common to see a character pull a switch, a face turn or a heel turn. But as I say, I've spoken a lot already about bad guys turning good, so today it's time to talk about what happens when a hero turns villainous. But while properly analysing that trope may come into play in future, today I just want to talk about an interesting case of a good guy turning bad that managed to become a meta redemption arc to the audience. How a hero despised by the audience became a villain adored by the audience. Let's talk about the journey of the character of Roman Reigns. Roman Reigns is a wrestler of Samoan origin, being a member of one of the most famous wrestling families out there, with relatives including the Wild Samoans, Yokozuna, Rikishi, Umaga, and of course, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. Reigns first joined WWE's developmental brand in 2010, but rose to prominence when he became a member of a new three-man tag team known as The Shield, a group consisting of him, the then NXT champion Seth Rollins, and the wrestler formerly known as Dean Ambrose. The Shield were a pretty major hit, quickly becoming one of the most popular tag teams in the company, continuing to dominate until 2014 when the group split after Seth Rollins' betrayal. At this point, Roman Reigns was doing fairly well. So well, in fact, that WWE chairman Vince McMahon had some pretty big plans for him. See, throughout the years, WWE has always had at least one star who could be considered the face of the company. The one guy that everyone knew and everyone loved. The previous face of the company, John Cena, who had admittedly always been a controversial face at the best of times, was starting to drift away from wrestling, and hence there needed to be a replacement. On the surface, Reigns looked like a pretty solid candidate. He had the right look, the right style, and he was the cousin of quite possibly the most famous face of the company of all time, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. What could possibly go wrong? Well, there's several things. But to start with, while Vince McMahon might have seen Roman as the next big thing, the fans had other ideas. And one of those ideas in particular would prove a bit of a spanner in the works. Daniel Bryan was not your stereotypical image of a wrestler. He was smaller than most, and he wrestled a more technical style as a result. But he absolutely had the heart and charisma to win over the entire audience. While previous face of the company, John Cena, had gained a fair amount of backlash due to seemingly being too invincible and protected, Daniel Bryan proved a very welcome contrast of a guy constantly having to prove his worth, and being severely underrated by the people in charge. He was, effectively, the ultimate underdog, and at the time, that was what fans wanted. With that in mind, let's talk about the 2015 Royal Rumble, aka the moment the audience truly turned on Roman Reigns. For those of you who aren't familiar, the Royal Rumble is one of WWE's biggest pay-per-views of the year. The titular match sees 30 wrestlers enter the ring one after the other, with the object of the match being to eliminate your opponent by throwing them over the top rope, with both their feet touching the ground. The last man, and now also last woman standing, gets a title shot with a champion of their choosing at WrestleMania. The 2015 Royal Rumble already had a bit of a mountain to climb. The previous year's Royal Rumble had seen a backlash due to both not featuring Daniel Bryan and also being won by older part-timer Batista rather than a popular up-and-coming star. At first, it seemed the 2015 Rumble was remedying past mistakes by making Bryan an entrant, and the fans were ecstatic. It seemed he was the perfect candidate to win, and then he was eliminated within about 10 minutes. at which point the fans absolutely turned sour. While there were some bright spots, once the final next best option Dean Ambrose was eliminated, no one was happy. Roman Reigns eliminating the last competitors based purely on luck, and even having to be rescued by The Rock in the process, did not make him look especially dominant either. He was declared victor, and The Rock famously looked quite confused as the boos began to rain down. The fans were absolutely livid. The hashtag #CancelWWE Network became the highest trending topic on Twitter. WWE had clearly made the wrong decision. So much so that rather than winning the title at WrestleMania, at the last minute it was decided Roman would instead lose after Seth Rollins cashed in on his match to more or less steal the title. Nonetheless, despite attempts to dial back his supposed Superman status, the damage was done. The fans were not going to forgive him. They were already sick of his badly scripted promos, his seemingly invincible status, the comparisons to John Cena, and the fact that so many more popular stars were being cast aside in order to make Roman Reigns look strong. Attempts to make him seem more like an underdog, like having him lose the 2016 Rumble match and consequently his championship to authority figure Triple H, did not work, since the fans could clearly see right through the booking and how manufactured it all felt. Having him beat and seemingly retire one of the most beloved stars of all time, The Undertaker, at WrestleMania 33 absolutely did not do him any favours, as it saw a thunderous chorus of boos the next night on Raw. His match the next year against Brock Lesnar also did not help matters, as it was so hated people began chanting for Braun Strowman's comedy child tag partner Nicholas. The fans were not just angry that Reigns was being overpushed, they were angry at the fact that any complaints they were voicing were just completely ignored. Things were not looking good, but then something far worse and far more real happened. On the 22nd of October 2018, Reigns revealed he'd been diagnosed with leukemia and was relinquishing the Universal Championship. At this point, the boos all ceased as people realised the man they'd been jeering all those years was still a human being underneath his persona. Reigns left for a few months and thankfully did make a quick recovery, returning in February the next year. Fans were a lot more welcoming, and while Reigns was still being treated like a star, he wasn't exactly being overpushed like previously. Though while fans weren't exactly booing anymore, deep down everyone was just a little bit anxious that Vince would go back to his old ways, and that Roman would possibly be forced to revert into the bland, invincible John Cena wannabe that no one wanted. Reigns was scheduled to face Goldberg at WrestleMania for the Universal title again. People weren't happy, though admittedly they were more mad at Goldberg for scoring a thoroughly undeserved victory over the Fiend Bray Wyatt, but that's another story entirely. Nonetheless, no one was especially thrilled, and it felt like yet another star had been screwed over for Roman's sake, and the fears were increasing. But due to the global pandemic and being at risk due to his cancer remission status, Roman withdrew from the match, which would instead be won by Braun Strowman. He stayed away from the ring for a couple months before finally returning at SummerSlam, right after Bray Wyatt had recaptured the championship. Reigns, however, turned his attention to Strowman, who he proceeded to beat mercilessly with a chair despite Strowman having just lost the match. That was uncharacteristically cruel behaviour and raised a few eyebrows. For years, the fans had been begging for a Roman Reigns heel turn. Many of the top stars of the company, including The Rock, had gained a lot of their popularity through heel personas, and given he was constantly booed, people figured he might as well take advantage of the boos. Come the next pay-per-view, Reigns entered a triple threat match for the championship, and revealed he was now working alongside former top heel Brock Lesnar's former manager Paul Heyman. Reigns won the match after basically sitting out the entire time and picking up a cheap victory. While this was a sign he was indeed a bad guy now, the true confirmation and establishment of his character was during his first championship defense against his own cousin Jey Uso. While previously being known by the nickname The Big Dog, heel Roman Reigns dropped that in favour of a new name, the Tribal Chief, a name he took very seriously. Reigns was determined to prove to everyone that he was the head of the table, but especially to his cousin Jay. Going into the match, while Jay gave it his all to prove his worth, no one was really expecting him to win. And in a stroke of genius, the match ended up not really being about winning. Despite having the opportunity to pin Uso many times, Roman didn't merely want to win. He wanted Jay to acknowledge him as the tribal chief, as the head of their family, and when Jay refused, he proceeded to beat the ever-loving hell out of him, saying he would only stop if he addressed him as the tribal chief. Jay refused, and the match eventually ended once Jay's twin brother Jimmy threw in the towel to try to save his tormented brother. A lot of people had expected Roman's potential heel turn to work in his favour, but no one had expected this. While Roman had always played a stone cold badass well, the tribal chief was more than that. He was a sinister, manipulative, power-hungry warlord determined to dominate anyone in his path and prove he was the true head of the division. Many people had assumed that when Roman did finally turn heel, he would perhaps address his previous reception from fans, but at that point there were no fans in the arena. And so, instead, while this wasn't outright addressed in a subtle way, it was still taking advantage of the reception. Tribal Chief Roman Reigns was a dominant champion set not just on winning, but on humiliating his opponents and proving he was worth more than all of them. He was now the guy in charge, whether they liked it or not, and as long as he was around, then as far as he was concerned, the entire division only existed to make Roman Reigns look strong. In other words, the tribal chief was the epitome of how the haters had viewed Roman Reigns for the last 5 years. And that was exactly why we loved it. While Reigns had constantly underwhelmed fans as a face, he had surpassed all expectations as a heel. He'd taken every negative interpretation of his previous character and emphasised them all, bar his bad promos, as now he was delivering all his lines with all the malice that he needed. After years of bad decisions, Roman Reigns had finally become the star that I feel, deep down, we'd always wanted him to be. No matter how much we may have booed the character, the man himself was absolutely not a bad guy, and he was ultimately a good wrestler. And as despicable as this new character was, finally seeing him being able to show the world how talented he truly was just felt like a breath of fresh air. After spending years resisting the idea of him being the head of the table, now he was downright demanding that we do, and all we could say was yes. Thanks for watching the video. As I say, a lot of people here probably only subscribe to hear me talk about films and TV, so I won't be talking about wrestling too much, but nonetheless, since it's something I do love, it's nice to just bring it up every now and again. But next week, I will be back to reviewing movies, and I do have a good idea for Valentine's Day. So, I hope to speak to you again then. Goodbye.